Let's see if I can get it on both screens. Hey, even better. We're going to talk a little bit about something fun, something practical. I'm going on the assumption that most of the people here are fairly comfortable with biometrics, at least a general idea of what it does, what it's all about. So in the spirit of hacking and playing, we're going to use something real and show you some products that you can actually use now for a reasonable amount of money, about $150 on the open market. Just right away an example. I've got to get into the computer anyway. And it's rather bright, and there we go. So, start the slideshow. My name is David Seago, aka Mindslip, for all of those hacker nickname types. I'm a network architect. I basically focus on security from the ground up rather than adding security as an afterthought later. I am also involved in a company called Secugen. I'm going to admit right off the start, I have an involvement with the company, so I'm somewhat biased to its products, but I figure it's fair to say so. What I'd like to cover in 25 minutes, if possible, is a brief intro, just to run through some...
You can talk long if you want. There's dinner afterwards.
Oh, there's no one after me. Okay, so we'll play. But I won't keep you from dinner, I promise. Some actual use of biometric technology as it exists in place today, and some ideas for potential future uses. And of course, anyone wants to stay around. If they want, we can discuss actually getting SDKs and playing with your own ideas. Biometrics, of course, like anything else in this conference, is going to raise practical and ethical issues. We'll touch on those a bit. And I've got some ideas that I just thought up over too much fun in Amsterdam of some ways we can get around some of those ethical issues by not actually keeping your fingerprints anywhere but on your finger. And of course, I'd like all your cryptographers' information on that, because I'm not a cryptographer. I'm going to make that disclaimer. So what is biometrics? What makes a fingerprint unique, and how does all of this work together? Biometrics is basically a way of looking at the physical characteristics of a person, be it the crook in their fingers and the width of their hand, the shape of the face, the pattern of the blood vessels on your retina, or the ridges and curves on your fingerprint, and using that as a unique key to identify the person. We've got fingerprints, as I mentioned, which is what I'll be focusing on. Retina and iris scans, so you can look at the vessels in the back. You could just as easily look at the pattern of the iris itself. Of course, you have to account for things like size and dilation of the pupil, the focusing length. There's a bit more involved because you're physically placing a face in an area where you can then focus a lens on it, rather than putting a fingerprint on a piece of glass. It's the same every time when you do that. There's a lot less effort involved. We also have facial recognition. In Canada, where I come from, we are using that in casinos, for instance, to try and identify known card sharks before they take away too much of the house's earnings. And again, hand recognition. I am doing some network architecture for the government of Ontario, our provincial government, and for instance, in a lot of the secure rooms, they've got a hand scanner, and the way that works is essentially you put your hand on a platform and you're taking a picture of it from above and comparing the outline of your hand. Now, what makes a fingerprint specifically unique? It's got ridges, you all know that. The ridges themselves vary in their density, how tightly packed they are. They vary in their depth. For instance, I'm a bassist, and I know between the callus on my finger and just wearing it away, I probably have very shallow ridges compared to somebody who doesn't do much work with their hands. That'll again differ from person to person. That will also differ from time to time over the course of years. As I age, as my skin wrinkles, if I've just come out of the bath, my fingerprint will be different. So there is a granularity to how good a match you can get. We'll get into error rates in a bit. Swirls and whirls, junctions, basically you're describing curves. Curves can be described mathematically. We're all familiar with splines. We're all familiar with vector images. What we can do is we can take the depth, we can take the swirls, the description of the curves, the points at which we have ridges intersecting and splitting, and that's called the minutiae. We can take that minutiae and turn it into a mathematical analysis, do a hash on it, spit it out as, in this case, a 400-byte word, and use that as what we're matching against. So whereas this is just a fancy hardened scanner, and when you put your finger on it, you will get an image out the other end if your software is written so. What you're actually using is a mathematical analysis of that graphical image. A lot of people have concerns with storing fingerprints. Nobody wants to think that your bank has all its clients' fingerprints on records. Nobody wants to think that your employer, when you push the door lock with your finger, can also then dust around, lift a fingerprint off of a doorknob, and put it on a scanner and match it. And, oh, he went into this room. That's not what's happening in the fingerprint world. That's not how biometrics works. How does it work? The fingerprint is scanned, and as I say, you've got a picture on screen. The minutiae is computed. The picture is vectorized. That 400-byte word is sent to a server, wherever the server may be. In just a client-server model, the server checks it against a database, against a stored minutiae that was stored under controlled circumstances. I have somebody who knows who I am take me to an administrator that they know works for the company and says, okay, I'm going to put my finger on it, store it in the database. I'm now registered. You knew it was me. It's not like I did it from remote and maybe it was me, maybe it wasn't. It compares to the database and sends back yes, no, the fingerprint was the guy we said it was or not. Essentially what a fingerprint then is a replacement for a password. You can know a password, but you can leave it on a sticky note on your monitor. Somebody can then steal it. You can have a badge and walk up to a door and put your badge to the reader. Somebody can take that as well. If you combine either of those, what you know and what you have, with what you are, an iris pattern, a fingerprint, a facial recognition, you have something that can't be stolen. It can be forced. You can twist my arm hard enough, and I'd rather let you into the room than have a bone broken. But you do need, the best way to do biometric authentication is in conjunction with something else. Now, fingerprint technology in actual use. You saw me log in. We've got the device here. What does this let me do? I'll give you an example. This, the company affectionately calls a hamster. Mouse was taken. The device itself is a little bit smaller than this outer shell, and they've turned it sideways and put it into a mouse. And I'll show you a picture of that in one of these. Got all sorts of... There we go. It's the same idea, turned sideways on the side of a mouse. This is the actual device itself, and embedded in it is basically a CPU to do the analysis of the fingerprint. The CPU board itself can also do encryption so that as near to the device as the end of this wire, it's already encrypted in some form before it's sent out to the computer. There's USB sniffer software, there's parallel sniffer software, there's sniffer software for TCP connections. You want it encrypted as soon as possible, or it's not really any better than somebody looking over your shoulder watching you type in your password, because you could then theoretically do a replay attack. Some other devices where it's actually being used that I just scrolled through a minute ago. This company, Keiko in Korea, these are manufactured in Korea currently, has a whole bunch of door locks. The idea is that if you take the embedded system, mount it in a wall securely, in that you need an axe to get it out, and then you can't even open the housing, it's not tamperable. What you send out of it, you could wire the wall panel directly to the door frame, you could have it go out with a TCP connection to a server, come back to the door frame, release a solenoid, open the door. There's combined with magnetic card readers, There's some interesting stuff here, actually. This is one of my favorites. It's got a dial panel. I think this is meant for an elevator or something. It's got a dial panel. It's got microphone and speaker. It's got a fingerprint reader and a camera built in. It's all in one. That's a little scary to me, but. And of course, a standard door lock where you can either put your finger on it or punch in a passcode, or both, whatever your security policy is. The idea, though, is give you a feel for what's actually out there. Now, I don't have a network connection, so I can't give you a live demo, but I'll show you how it works. For instance, this is a site that we've mocked up. It is an actual live website that basically lets you do fake stock trading, more like a game, but you authenticate over the web by downloading an ActiveX control or a Java control and using it to scan your finger in. Now, let me just see if it'll at least, without a network connection at all. Nah, it's not happy from my cache, so we'll skip that bit. Back to this. Currently, banks are using it for login over the web. They're also looking at it for ATM machines. You're going to get to the point where you'll walk up to an ATM machine, put in your card, that'll tell the bank your account information. Remember, a fingerprint doesn't have storage. You need storage of some sort, so a chip or a magnetic stripe. And instead of punching in a PIN number, put your thumb or your finger on it. If somebody steals your card and they've looked over your shoulder, what have they seen? You've put your finger on it. They really would have to twist your arm for that. Safes as well. O'Hare Airport, the busiest or second busiest airport in the United States, is in the middle of a pilot project where they've actually implemented this brand of door panels in all of their secure areas, and they're looking at replacing those cards that staff walk around with. Now, the possible uses of fingerprint technology is really where it gets fun. The device is pretty small. There are smaller, less rugged ones out there. This in particular uses hardened glass and an actual CCD and a prism. There are some devices that fit built right onto a PCMCIA card, but you're putting your finger right on a silicone CCD with just a layer of transparent silicone over it. They wear out very quickly, but they're amazingly small, very convenient. Pop it in your machine, you've got your portable fingerprint reader. If we had one built into a laptop, for instance, with drivers in BIOS, regardless of what operating system and what password protection on the OS, you couldn't turn the thing on without a fingerprint. Car ignitions, again, ATM machines, basically anywhere where you can use authentication, you can build a box that lets you log in with your finger. Store the templates locally, make the box tamper-proof, store it remotely, go outside and ask for a connection. Now, the practical issues of biometrics, they're hard to weigh. I know a lot of large companies who have at least one person on staff who does nothing but password resets. Gets a call every 5 minutes, I forgot my password. I put into place a web filtering system for the government of Ontario, and of course, some people will need to get around that. A detective doing an investigation, for instance. They'll have to log in, let the system know who they are, okay, you can get to any site. There are 2,500 judges in Ontario who have all forgotten their passwords, and they have all called. We have at least 2 people just resetting passwords on a regular basis. Now, how do you forget your fingerprint? How do you leave your fingerprint on the corner of a monitor written down so everyone can see it? You can't. For about $150 a shot, or a workstation, you're basically making it much more convenient for a user. They don't have to remember anything. That, however, brings into the question of user acceptance. There's a lot of perception of, well, if I've got my finger on there, you know my fingerprint, and you know too much about me. In fact, from a technical level, we know that's not true. All we know is a mathematical analysis of a picture of your finger. But people in daily use kind of wonder, is this too big brotherish, or is this really convenient for me and I like it? That's the biggest issue that I've found in rolling these out. And still, companies roll it out anyway. Samsung's rolled out 5,000 of these on their workstations. The ethical issues are, what do you do with the fingerprint? Where are you putting it? What actually are you collecting? You can still see a picture of the finger when you put it on the screen. It's still a scanner. How do I know that you're not taking a snapshot of that at the same time as you're computing the minutiae? That's where open software will obviously come in, peer review, and written and enforced policies. Now, the ease of collection as well leads a lot of people to think, well, it's just so easy for a bank to go and take all its customers, give them this great service, advertise the hell out of it, and they all sign up. And now a bank's got 4 million fingerprints on record. That's a scary thought, too. That leads into the discussion that was had previously, the forum on hacker ethics and can they be taught. You have to teach people what you're actually doing. It's great to advertise a service. Yeah, you've got fingerprints. It's just you don't have to remember anything. You don't have anything to forget. But you have to tell them that the reality of it is it's just typing in a password. It's just a really easy password to remember because you carry them with you. Now, identity theft has a lot of misperceptions of its own. The biggest one that I could log in as somebody else and play with all sorts of information. Fingerprints have two main types of errors. There's something called a false acceptance rate, which means I've typed in username Joe and I've put Sarah's finger on here. And it looks at Sarah's finger and it says, oh, yeah, I think you're Joe, and it lets you log in. That's a false acceptance. There's a false error rate, which is just the opposite. I type in Joe, I put Joe's finger on here, and it says, no, you're not Joe. Try again, give me Joe's finger. The two are sort of diametrically opposite. If one goes up, the other typically goes down. On average, you get about a 0.001% false acceptance rate, which means 1 in 100,000. You have to ask yourself how many people you're registering and how often they're going to be logging in. Is that kind of a percentage acceptable to you? The false error rate is a little higher. It's sometimes around 0.1%. But how many times do you mistype your password anyway? There is no, so far, there is no perfect recognition system of any type, finger, iris. Eyes are usually higher than most, though. Now, storing the fingerprint anywhere, remember we're not storing the fingerprint. We're storing a 400-byte analysis of the fingerprint. Because it's basically a one-way hash, it's not a drawing of it, it's not a list of vectors of where the ridges intersect. You can't take that minutiae and do something backwards to redraw a fingerprint on screen. So I couldn't lift a fingerprint off of a table with a piece of tape, put it on here, scan it in, because these don't generally let you fake things. And just as much, I couldn't take a minutiae, draw a fingerprint, lift somebody's, compare it against a whole bunch and say, oh yeah, it was him that touched this because I regenerated his fingerprint.
Not entirely quite plain, because you can use the same hash on the fingerprint as well, especially if you use an open source solution, because the hash is known, so in other words, you can hash the dust of fingerprint and you can compare that to the database.
You can, in some ways, and of course if you have enough money. Basically, if you do a one-way, one-time hash each time, like a private public key pair, you work around that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. With the false acceptance rate, that counts for things like wax molds, amputated fingers, lifts. There's actually more going on than just looking at a pattern of ridges. A human hand has a temperature, and thus if you look at it with infrared, it has a temperature signature. The ridges themselves have some depth, so if you look at them through the prism from two different angles, You can see if it's a flat dusting or if it's the person's, well, even particularly a model, but then a model doesn't have temperature. Now, I was talking about this with Phil Zimmerman, and I got the great quote, "If you think that Louis Freeh, the head of the FBI, with all his money, couldn't fake anything, you're kidding yourself." And that's absolutely true. He could crack anything, he could fake anything, you could fool anything. PC Magazine, last month or the month before, did a review of 6 fingerprint readers, and we're able to fool 2 of them. Not this one, thankfully. In some cases, it may, and that would be the false error rate. It's the right finger, but some circumstances of it have changed, the temperature in this case, or in cold, of course, your fingers will shrivel up a little bit. That'll change the density, some angles. So you very well may have a false error because of that. It's easily worked around, just warm yourself up a little bit. And all in all, remember that it's not the only solution. Fingerprints is not something you do on your own, any more than a password should be something you do on your own. You don't have a bank card without a PIN machine, without a PIN number.
This is true if you're looking at the user point of view.
Yes.
But if you look at the corporation point of view, it's not true anymore, because the corporation actually has the database and has the hash, and is actually able to use the database of their millions of fingerprints to actually, they can potentially verify just the fingerprints on their own local database, something that usually only the Justice Department says.
If they could generate, if they could cause a fingerprint recognition device to generate the same hash from a dusted lift as they could from a live finger, then absolutely they could. And, well, they have a database of those hashes. So what they need to do is turn the dusted lift, the picture, into a hash. And yes, if they know the algorithm for doing so, in some cases is open source. I mean, if I'm going to write an open source fingerprint routine, I'd open up the driver library. I wouldn't necessarily tell you my algorithm, because then it kind of blows things right out of the water. But then again, you could always tweak it. It's not the only way around it. That's the important thing to remember. A lot of people are under the misperception that I've got a fingerprint on there, it's secure. I've got a password. Why is that secure?
The first one is a very, very fundamental thing. Once your biometric key is compromised, you cannot revoke it anyway.
Yes, I have 10 tries essentially, 10 compromises, and then I have to deploy an eye scanner, and then I only have 2 more. Yes.
The second problem is 2.5 years ago, we put around some fingerprint scanners. So we took a fingerprint from a glass, so it's very easy to obtain a fingerprint. We buy a couple of copies of the printer. So we tape this with adhesive tape. We use some graphite to get a fingerprint. We use some latex to get deep ridges, so not only thin. And we made small globes from the latex to have light sensing. So we used a live finger with a latex globe, so the machine accepted it. It was very easy to do. It was made at the cost of, let's say, $25. We made it in 1 month. And it's a problem, I think it's very difficult to prevent with especially fingerprint sensors, because you do not want to reject too many tries of legitimate users.
That's true. You don't.
I think fingerprint pattern matching is in the end not possible. Too many weak points. We thought about how would we design a system that seems to be reasonable. Sure. So we said we use iris scanning, and we have a display with a moving dot. We have the camera, and the user has to follow the dot with his eyes. So we are sure he's alive.
Clever.
And we are sure these are his eyes or he's reaching out. And we know no way at the moment how to fake reaching out.
Absolutely true.
That's something different than fingerprint. So I said fingerprinting is only feasible for very low security things.
On its own, I would agree with you. Fingerprinting on its own is, to me, a tough-to-crack password. Fingerprinting in conjunction with, in a practical application, I wouldn't use two biometrics, because that's a lot of money and support to deploy. Fingerprinting and a PIN card, fingerprinting and a password as well. Anything else like that, you're adding an extra layer. I would never just go with one password where I know security is a real issue. Now, I'd like to give a suggestion. I discussed this really without showing it, so this is totally first thoughts on the idea, but I'm thinking of a way around some of these issues, and because this is meant to be a practical forum, maybe we can all look at it. There's something on the market called an eye button, and I'm wearing one on my finger. It's essentially a steel-cased centimeter-and-a-half cylinder and about a centimeter-and-a-half diameter and about half a centimeter tall. It is tamper-proof, shock-proof, this and that. Basically, if you try to probe it, it self-destructs. It blows up. It comes in it's great. I just hope I don't bash it against the table and my finger explodes or something. But it comes in a few different flavors. Most of them have a 10-year battery in it. This particular one has a 10-year battery and a processor, and it runs Java and does the Java Crypto API and has about 160K of memory. There's a newer version with 200K. But so essentially, I'm walking around with a Java computer on my finger. Now, that's something we can use as a trusted third party that belongs to me, the user, who really, in a sense, is the more important of the relationship, the user versus the server, versus the third party itself. The idea I was having is that because there is a lot of concern in the industry with storing minutiae, let alone storing fingerprints, but just storing the minutiae, the 400-byte string, what if we were to create a key pair system that uses the unique ID of the I button, they all have a serial number like a MAC address, with the minutiae as the passphrase for the key. For instance, if I'm going to register the button as a trusted third party to the server, an administrator, a trusted administrator, would take the button, put it to the connector on the server. It's really just the ring is, the outer ring is ground and the top face is signal, both power and signal at the same time. Put it on the connector, have the server send its public key to the I button. You then know that the I button has the right public key. Take a fingerprint recognition device, take the minutiae, have it sent to the ring, or, well, in my case, a ring, but to the I button, and using the ID of the button and the minutiae that it just got, the 400-byte string, use that as a passphrase, generate a key pair, a private and a public key. What we can then do is take the server's public key that we just received when we registered this button. We can take the key that I just generated using the minutia and sign it, send it to the server. So the server now knows what my button's public key is. I know, of course, what the server's public key is. We're now establishing a sort of trust. The server now knows who the third party is. Each time I want to, well, which order did this go in? Sorry. Each time I want to log in, I've got to generate a session key. This helps against replay attacks. It helps against lifting and generating a minutia. Basically, we're using a one-time key for the duration of this set of transactions. So the server would generate a session key pair. It would send the session key, public key, signed with the server's private key, to the button. Did I skip one? No, I didn't. Sorry. The button has the server's public key. It can verify the signature. It can take my fingerprint again, take the minutia from that, and use that with its private key to decrypt what it just got. Now it has a signed by the server, encrypted to me, public session key. So I've now established a trust relationship with the button, and I've established a session. We now basically are sure of the server. From the button's point of view, for instance, we're sure of the server, we're sure of the button. The third party and the back office, the server, are comfortable with each other. And we've got a session key to use for this set of transactions only. Now, to authenticate the user, basically I do a fingerprint scan, or this could all be in the same fingerprint scan. Implementation is for the programmers, not for me. We sign the session key that we just got with our private key. What that does is it says, here's the session key you sent me. Just to be sure you sent it to me, I'm going to sign it with my private key. Then I'm going to generate that and send it back to the server. So the server now has its own session public key signed by the trusted third party you sent it to. It can then decode that with its private key, look and verify see that it has a session key signed in there, check the signature against the registered public key that it got when the button was registered, and say, yeah, he knows about the session key, and he really is the trusted third party, so we've got this session set up. It's a very complex TCP three-way handshake, if you would. The server still doesn't know who the user is. The button knows who the user is. It's using the minutia as a passphrase. The server knows who the trusted third party is. They're already talking to each other and getting a session ready. The server doesn't know who the user is. So the button, the button basically, because it's signed, just trying to get this clear in my head, because it has signed the key back with its private key. The only way it can do that is if it's the user's particular button, which has the right sets of keys on there, has the right, essentially MAC address, but unique ID number, and has the right minutiae from the right fingerprint generated to verify that, yep, this is he who put his finger on the reader to use the passphrase to sign the session key to send it back to the server. Now we've got a three-way trust established. We know who the user is from the server's point. The server knows who the user is. More importantly, the user knows who the server is. I know that I'm logging on to my bank. I'm not logging on to some hacked up web page that looks a lot like my bank. And it's possible. The third party has done all the exchanging, and if you look at it, the only place a minutia or a fingerprint has ever gone is into the passphrase on a button. So we've not stored a minutia anywhere. We've not stored a fingerprint anywhere. We're not relying on only a fingerprint, which is really no better than relying on a password. We're relying on what you know, what you are, a biometric, with what you have. In this case, a Java-enabled device like an iButton, or there are Java smart cards. I'm just using this as an example because I happen to be wearing them. So, in summary, and we did it in a half hour after all, what is biometrics? It's convenience. It is being able to just look at a lens, have it focus on your eye and go, yep, you're you. I'll let you in. It's being able to not forget your password and have to call the help desk because you're carrying 10 of your passwords with you everywhere you go. It's also a method of assuring that the person who is being authenticated is not just someone with a good idea of who they're trying to imitate. It's not somebody who's stolen your password or who calls up and knows your mother's maiden name and does some social engineering and gets a password reset done, and now the default password is password and they can log in again. They've actually got to be the person they say they are. What biometrics is not is a complete solution. It is not a solution to large-scale trust and authentication. The error rate on a very large scale, on the order of bank registrations, thousands and millions of customers, is just too high. For my mind, there's too great a risk. And that goes for retina scans, that goes for face scans. None of them are guaranteed. When you type a password and a PIN number, unless you type it wrong, you're typing in the right thing each time. It's pretty static. With recognition, there is a range for error. It's also not a threat. Biometrics is not putting on record everything about who you are and you only to such a specific degree that you can be nailed as this is exactly where you were and what you did. You're not creating a record of everybody's eyes or everybody's fingers. You're not able to take a DNA sample and regenerate the whole human race, each person you want from it. You're storing a mathematical analysis if you're storing everything at all. And I would love some cryptographers to come talk to me about this method and see if there's any merit to it, because I really don't have any expertise in that area. Where can biometrics be used? Well, it's all there, yeah.
I think I have a problem with the last sentence, because the biometrics is not a potential threat to identity. I think that is true if everything is not right. If the information is not right,
Agreed.
if somebody has thought about all the threats and how to avoid them a lot, then it's not a threat. But that means a lot of things have to go right, and this
Yeah.
is usually not the case.
I think anything that,
Red,
yes, I think there's anything that has a question of ethics involved has to be done with those ethics in mind, or the whole idea just goes out the window.
I basically agree with Jim.
Which has nothing to do with what he said, but yes.
I think that's yeah. But just to summarize also my thing. To summarize your story, what you're basically saying is biometrics is more convenient than, for example, PIN number,
Mhm.
and that it can be used in cases where people use PIN numbers, for example, buying something in store. With this, I completely agree, because the level of security is very low in the store. By book, you have to type the PIN number, effort would not be stolen.
I never trust the person to not steal my carbon.
But,
I'd rather buy online.
I'm not very knowledgeable about credit cards and stuff, but I read about it, and the companies are have a whole kind of protocol and stuff to revoke payments and stuff like that. So in practice, that part is done.
It's essentially somebody loses money because somebody still has the product and it's not getting paid for. Yeah.
But to be honest, I think that both the positive statements, it is not for potential threat to identity theft, and it is not something that can be easily right, are not sufficiently correct. It's a matter of convenience,
Yeah.
but I don't think that you can state that it has a better level of security than what's already there.
No, I don't. In fact, I don't think I would state it's a better level of security.
With your summary, because I think you look more positive than it is.
For the right uses. Perhaps it really you have to look at your own implementation of it as a security measure. You have to look at how you're doing it, and am I doing it right? Am I scanning the fingerprint and just happen to be taking a snapshot of the image of the finger at the same time, or am I doing it securely?
The second speaker remarked, everything has to be done right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an avid reader of the top register mailing, and I've learned a lot about cases where something went wrong, and there are a lot of cases exposed about identity theft.
Indeed.
A lot in the United States,
To some degree, I think it's hyped up in the media more so. But biometrics, like any other security issue, raises as many ethical issues as it does practical and implementation. Let me just move on, because there are a number of people, I'm sorry to cut you off. It can be done ethically.
Okay, basically, if you go back to the thing, if if they can find like your top notch, you can
Or change with age.
yeah, I mean, like even if you're going to the grocery store,
Mhm.
you still usually use it to break into your business layer. Security, one of the most fundamental things about security is passwords, and one of the most fundamental things about passwords is they change on a regular basis.
And that's why I say you must use it with another method.
Why don't you just use the other password? Why don't you do something that you change once, like you take your credit card, use that, and then you put your PIN number, and you change both?
Well, that's asking a question like, why do I put 2 firewalls in when if they can break in the first one, they could probably get through the second one? It's a detail of implementation. It's a detail of what you're weighing as a higher priority.
But once you break in that first firewall, you can never use that firewall for anything ever again. Then no matter what you go to, at any level of security, all you have to do is break that second layer, that PIN number, at that point.
Well, for instance, if you do use a trusted third party, a one-time hash, other elements like that, you're coming back to the question of how do I do it? This is a scanner with some math and some encryption involved. I mean, I could write software that'll do the same thing on an HP flatbed. It's really nothing that extremely new and complex. It just happens to be very convenient and very rugged. But by the same token, I could write keyboard sniffing software or whatever. It's how you implement it.
Does always display when you log in your fingerprint on the screen?
This particular software, it's just a checkbox. And in fact, what I'm demonstrating is really just meant for demonstration. It's certainly by no means, this particular for demonstration software, it doesn't even bother encrypting out the wire or anything. It's to get a point across.
Because you can monitors, especially CRT monitors.
Yep. Oh, I could just monitor the USB and find the graphics format, probably easier even. So.
There's one thing we can talk about. Security is, as we all a matter of money and job. It should be more difficult to break the secret transfer. So, credit card information, for example, is extremely insecure. So you give your credit card to every waiter in the restaurant. So the quality might be possible to commit fraud with.
In fact, it's fairly cheap and easy to do so with a credit card.
There is a second line of defense, and that's justice. So the point is, I think I will agree with you if you say it's much cheaper to have 2 system administrators less that is set password all day long,
Mhm.
that costs $200 a year, and to live with the risk of having to flatten out anything that went wrong with pattern matching the fingerprints. So it's cheaper in the end, and so it's useful. That's what is possible.
And again, that brings back the practical aspect.
Yeah. So
I agree with what you're saying, but if you introduce a lot of combinations, like let's say you know what you have, what you are,
Mhm.
each one of them becomes a point of failure. So you have more points of failure, so you actually reduce the actual chance of getting logged on properly. Would you agree with that?
That's entirely possible. I still have my finger. It's recognizing my finger right, but because they want that extra layer, I'm supposed to punch in a pin as well, and I just can't remember it today because I haven't had my coffee yet. It's not going to authenticate me.
Yeah, but I was thinking the other way around, that you actually remember your PIN, but the finger reader doesn't work anymore, so therefore you won't get in. So
There's a hardware failure. Yep, there's a point of failure for that, absolutely.
would you think that would be a major factor, like when banks not to
Well, with devices that have been, agreed, they're a lot less rugged. The glass isn't as hard. There are coatings on the glass that eventually wear away. You're putting your finger right on the silicone itself, things like that. you know, I'm actually quite impressed with this, just in terms of its temperature range, its hardness, its ruggedness. And you could always go one layer up and one layer up, but for 150 bucks, if it dies, I've probably got a few in the closet, and I'll plug a new one in. Again, it's practicality. Yes?
I think it's not really a point of security. Biometrics itself is not really secure. My chip card itself is not secure. My Java engine can be compromised. Anything, my password can be sniffed. The goal is not to have one single thing that is completely secure. That's not possible. We all know. But the goal is what do I want to have for security? What level of security I want to reach? And then.
And at what cost?
Yeah, and what can I use for this? When I just need a low level of security, then a fingerprint scanner or just a small PIN number is really enough.
Absolutely.
When I want high security, then I can spend 20 layers of anything, and this still can be compromised in any way.
Agreed.
But, where is it useful to spend a lot of money, and where it is not practical anymore?
And what so far has been said is that it boils down to practicality, and it boils down to what you prioritize: utter security over ease of use, ease of deployment. It's really an issue of how can I use this, rather than how can I get caught up in it, and how can I make it a support headache. How can I actually use this in an embedded application, in a software application? What's practical and useful? Up there?
How well does the fact that how will this stop the judges from calling their help desk line? They're still being given the password, so they'll just forget.
Well, it's hypothetical. They're not using this, they're just using a password, but I know it's pretty hard. If I have a fingerprint reader in front of me, it's pretty hard to forget to use it when I've got a fingerprint thing on the screen. But that would be an issue of implementation. Then, is this enough? Or is a 4-digit PIN number, and if they enter 1, 2, 3, 4, great, because they still have to have their finger, which is harder to fake? Or am I going to require a fingerprint, an iris scan, and a 10-character long, completely alphanumeric punctuation and everything password, and then an armed guard just to make sure? It's really, what is practical? If I've got a device that I can embed, that I can write to, that I've got a set of drivers for, that I don't have to start from scratch, or if I've got a sticky note on a monitor with a password that I have to worry about, or if I've got so many layers that nobody can even use it and they just get fed up and go home, what are you trying to solve, and at what cost are you going to get there? And that's why we have to think about biometrics in an ethical way. How can we make sure we're not storing too much information and too many samples of too much information? In a practical way, from an administrator's point of view or from a techie's point of view, how much work is this going to be to write for, to support, to build and design and implement? And from a user's point of view, if I know that I just go up to my front door and I go like this and I get in, that's amazingly useful to me. I don't want to fumble for my keys. It's probably easier for a lockpick out in the tent out there to get into my door than for somebody to fake a fingerprint, so I'm really not too worried about that, and I'm sure I've left the house with the door unlocked anyways a few times. And the stove on and lights on and all that. So it really comes down to an issue of practicality. Biometrics has to be looked at from a very complete point of view. We're not just dealing with a password anymore, and okay, yeah, I forgot it, so I know it's him calling me, I recognize his voice. It's something that can be a lot more useful, but has to be thought about in quite a bit more detail. Anything else? Anyone else? Way at the top. Sorry, I can't hear you with the walking. If you could speak up. Agreed. So in the idea of, well, you can register multiple fingers, but then you only have 10 that can be compromised. But in the idea of a fingerprint combined with, say, an ID number that's just used to generate a key pair, well, okay, that's compromised, I throw out the key. Maybe even throw out the button or whatever sort of trusted third party that gives us another unique ID. Put a new combination together, generate a new key, for instance, you've got your finger back. So again, it's a matter of, are you going to go to that much trouble, which is maybe a little more inconvenient in one way that you've got to do that sort of development, but it's much more convenient in that if something gets compromised, you just throw it out and start fresh, as it were.
Don't you think that, given the fact that arguably, information is more easily compromised or at least very compromised as far as to change it, and the cost that it's only use, practical use of the additional layer, in other words, that it will in practice never be used without a password, and therefore the argument that it will be easier to use is actually a non-argument because in practice it will be a security issue, so it will only be an additional security layer. It will never be more easy for you because they will always have to use passwords, otherwise it will be insecure.
Well, the first thing I will not do is say never. But, having said that, there may well be a point where the false acceptance rate and the false error rate is so low, and for a lot of uses, it's already so low that it's negligible. Just as much as typing in a password and having a typo is negligible. I get the login box again, okay, I try again, this time I make sure caps lock is off. We've all done that. There's a product that you can get made by these folks, Secugen, that it basically acts as your fingerprint acts as a lockbox for all the passwords stored in your Windows password list. When you go onto a website and it recognizes a form, it pops up with a fingerprint box. You put your fingerprint on it, it punches in your username and your password and clicks submit for you. Now, I use a billion different passwords on a billion different sites, and I sometimes remember them all on a good day. And I know that they're probably more often than not stored in my Windows password list anyway because I forgot to click don't use cookies or something. So if at least I know it's convenient, it can be compromised anyway, at least let it be convenient for me. Because really, if somebody wants to get in, they will get in no matter what level you use. I'll let them twist my arm behind my back. I'm pretty pacifistic in that way. I'll just let you in, no problem. Deal with it later. But it boils down to what are you trying to protect and at what cost and at what convenience or lack of convenience. I don't know. I've never seen a cloned human. I've read on conspiracy sites that there are 7 or 8 cloned babies walking the earth, but I can't say I know that for sure, and I've never compared their fingerprints to anyone else. Good point. Yes. How? Yes, absolutely. Spray paint.
So, for example, if you want to dot a
Mm-hmm.
paint, blue, very easy, very fast, very unobtrusive.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I could then, of course, take, a good tube of real solid epoxy and just walk up to a door frame and go and caulk the door frame with epoxy, but somebody will see me. There's cameras for that. I guess maybe we should... one more and then we'll stop there and go eat.
Do you think it's irresponsible to be promoting this technology so early on? I can't see use where there is a secure purpose or have a Java card with a fingerprint scanner on it has internally self-generated key, right? That's replaceable.
Mm-hmm.
I retain the ability to change my identity and swap identity command. And I authenticate to the card.
Mm-hmm.
Easy to do with fingerprint. basically storing fingerprint information, which in the future will be potentially very, very important to me at the moment in this secure phone. Potentially using this in corporations when I'm trading parts of my biometric identity to get a job. You know, corporation installs fingerprint scanners on all the PCs, and how you'll actually log in.
That's a loaded question in a few ways, and I'm not going to let it be. Is it irresponsible to promote this type of security this early on? It's not really early on, first of all. It's quite well developed. It's quite a few generations in. Obviously,
Secure. The environment it's being used in is not secure yet.
well, the environment it's being used in for years is normally military. The environment where and you always get that trickle down. The internet is a military experiment that trickled down to the consumers, much like biometrics and encryption, any of that. So, in fact, behind the scenes, it's not very early on at all. Is it irresponsible to promote? Depends how you promote it. If I said this is the be-all and end-all, yes, absolutely, that would be very irresponsible to promote it that way. But making everybody aware that it is not a complete solution, that it's convenient, it's not necessarily 100%, suggesting ways to implement it, quote-unquote, properly. Properly is defined as whatever meets your needs and meets your own personal ethics. And that's going to be left up to the individual doing the development or the implementation.
But if the corporation implements and allows the user to use it, then you've really got the choice of how to determine the right issues.
You're not storing anything that can be turned into you, any more so than a username and a password can let you at the kind of data that you wouldn't want manipulated.
Well, that's the technology, obviously, scans, and it does.
If it scans, then perhaps they are storing fingerprints. What do you know about the things you submit to? Are you submitting to them blindly, or are you submitting to them educated? Do I fill in the form on every web page I get and then wonder why I have so much spam? Or do I read it and say, they don't need to know this, and just ignore it? Education is a key issue.